Most everyone has heard of the water crisis in Hot Springs, Arkansas. But is there really a water crisis? Let's look at a few of the related statements that have been made by those in charge of the Hot Springs water system. Most of us will likely remember that city leaders have told us numerous times that we were running out of water once we achieved what they said was 80% of the city's treatment capacity. You've likely heard the other claims as well, such as, we will be over capacity by 2015. You may not know that the city has disallowed a new super Walmart west of town, plus numerous other businesses, apartment complexes, and residential subdivisions by actually curtailing water to the county outside the city limits. Just recently, you've learned that the city plans to sell $110 million in revenue bonds to build new treatment plants, pipelines, storage tanks, etc., and to do so, they recently raised water rates substantially to pay for these aggressive projects. All of these statements appear to be designed to support claims that we actually have a water crisis, but most city leaders are now calling the condition a water shortage. Well, not everyone thinks there is a crisis requiring us to spend $110 million, especially since the city fathers didn't even allow its citizens to vote. In fact, they didn't even hold a public meeting so customers could be informed as to how their money would be spent. This brief presentation will address all of these items and explain which are only perceptions and which may have factual merit. By the end of our presentation, we think you will agree that there is not a water crisis, nor has there ever been a water crisis. We will show where approximately $10 million of your money has already been wasted on projects that cannot or will not happen. You will likely learn what organizations are actually pushing our city leaders to make very unwise decisions in planning and in spending your money improperly. You will also discover that the city is pursuing water supplies that will be sufficient for some 200 years by their own admission. You will learn of letters and advice from the state health department telling the city that they are planning too far into the future, spending money unwisely, not addressing appropriate concerns, and not properly running our water system. At the end, we will demonstrate why the city's plans and rates are illogical and offer a few common sense plans of our own. First, let's look at how the city justified telling us that we had a water crisis. In fact, there was never a crisis, but you should know also that the city doesn't even have a master plan, even if there was a crisis. The health department continuously complains about that fact. In fact, the city does not even have a conservation plan to employ if they ever did have an actual shortage of water. Do you think perhaps the city actually knows there is no crisis or even a shortage? The city told us on numerous occasions over several years that they can justify claiming a water crisis because they reached 80% of their treatment capacity in 2012, and they blame this on an Arkansas Health Department requirement. This is not a Health Department requirement. The Arkansas Department of Health, or ADH, does recommend that once a water utility reaches 80% of its installed treatment capacity, the utility should begin planning for an additional supply. That statement is much different than what the city blames the ADH for. What the city also did not tell us was the fact that they were losing approximately 46% of the water they produced. Most of this was assumed to be leaks in the system, but if even partially corrected would result in a usage well under 80%. Until we obtained the data through a Freedom of Information request, the city also failed to tell us they could actually take an additional 10 million gallons per day at their current treatment plant location. We even have emails from the ADH, the city's utilities director, and the city engineer stating that there is no water crisis. If you look at the first bar graph, you can see that the city claimed to reach 80% of capacity in 2012. Note that the actual was only about 60%, as shown in bar 3, with the additional 10 million gallons per day available. Bar 4 shows that the maximum reached was only about half the capacity if water losses were reduced by only 1/2. If you look at this data, you will find that these losses were referred to as UFW by the ADF, unaccounted for water. The final bar shows that with treatment capacity increased and both plants operating, the city would reach 40% of its capacity only. This is far from qualifying as a water crisis, don't you think? The real problem with the city's water system is similar in many respects to problems with their buildings, their equipment, their parks, etc. Lack of maintenance. Reports to the ADH indicate that the city is still losing almost half the water it produces. Note that these losses have ranged from almost 47% to over 50% since 2012. These losses must be corrected. The city cannot use most of its installed water storage, water tank capacity, and the ADH continues to point out that they need 2 days of storage capacity, but they only have less than a half of 1 day. We noted that approximately $10 million of the utility customers' money has been literally wasted. Yes, we can document that fact. This is an invoice from the city's contract register showing that Jacobs Engineering was paid well over $3 million just for engineering and design services. For what, you ask? For a treatment plant and intake on South Lake Hamilton that the city knew could never be permitted. This is one of several letters telling the city that they should not continue to expend resources for this project. You will likely remember the grandiose plan to obtain water from Lake DeGray. This plan included treatment plants and some 20 miles of 46-inch pipeline in Hot Spring County, not Garland County. This project would have also cost the city well over $100 million, but the U.S. Corps of Engineers flatly rejected the city taking water from the lake in spite of the fact that the city paid Central Arkansas Water, CAW, over $1 million for that water. Yes, the city also paid for design and engineering for this project, even though no water was available. Here's the city board approval of over $3.8 million for that failed project. Make up your own mind. Was this yet another expense that we paid that was poorly planned and our money should not have been spent? You are probably asking, who is recommending these poorly thought out projects and who is approving them? It appears that the CAW and the Mid-Arkansas Water Authority, or MAWA, are the groups recommending them, and the city is approving and paying for them. If you look at the location of the intake, pipeline, and water treatment plant for the DeGray project, you can only wonder, who does this benefit? That project was not even in our county. We found the answer. See the note at the bottom. Yes, after some searching, this earth-shattering revelation was made by the city manager himself, obviously during a moment he wasn't thinking clearly. Note the words in yellow from his own email. In reality, it is the CAW route to serve its customers in Saline and Pulaski counties. Okay, Mr. City Manager, then why are we paying for it? Yes, there is a contract with CAW binding Hot Springs at its sole expense to pay for an 80-foot wide right-of-way approximately 20 miles long. Yes, at our sole expense, but we must allow joint use by the CAW if and when they need it. Okay, what is the current plan? Since we acquired Ouachita Water, maybe we can get out of that agreement, right? The answer is not likely and not cheaply. The current plan continues to call for a treatment plant south of town and another 20-mile-long pipeline to take raw water to a site somewhere near Amity Road or Jack Mountain. Does that sound like a pipeline to once again reach the CAW right-of-way? It certainly doesn't look like it is intended for Hot Springs and Garland County, the growth corridor which is west of town, not south of town. In fact, the city's newest water storage tank is located on Amity Road. It is not in service because anticipated growth in the area did not happen. Our newest tower is slowly rusting away. Should this be considered as a couple of $1 million more that was wasted due to poor planning? Just saying. This graph from the city's rate expert gives a more accurate report on actual water sales all the way back to 2007. Yes, 2012 was the year of highest usage, but even then the average daily use was only 8.8 million gallons a day. The peak could have reached or exceeded 20 million gallons, but with sufficient reserve storage tanks, this should not prove a problem. This chart is also from the city's rate consultant and forecasts a maximum daily usage of only 9 million gallons through 2023. With our current capacity of over 20 million gallons a day, Even current capacity is more than sufficient. If only we would fix some of the UFW, or leaks. Early city projections used a very optimistic growth projection for the city. This growth is not happening. The county was growing until the city curtailed water to out-of-city users, but the city continues to actually decline in population. Although our existing 29 million gallons per day supply should prove adequate for many years, we do not object to increasing the supply available to the city. The question should be, how much water do we really need? If you add our existing supply to that available without having additional permissions from anyone, we would have almost 40 million gallons a day available. Adding the DeGray and Ouachita water would give us much more water than we would need for a couple of 100 years. In fact, the city and their consultant know this as a fact. The city's water consultant even pointed out that this city, this county, is set up for the next 150 to 200 years with those three water supplies. Who plans that far out, and who pays for projects that are not needed for over 150 years? Most planning is done for 20-year needs.
This city, this county, is set up for the next 150 to 200 years with those three water supplies.
Even the ADH has pointed out that simply adding additional supply already available at the current plant location would satisfy our needs for the next 15 to 25 years. Look at the text in red on this slide. This recommendation from the Health Department was given to the city numerous times over the last several years. This one is dated in 2010. You can also see other recommendations relative to not building expensive pipelines, not building more treatment plants, and reducing the water lost in the distribution system. To expand on the ADH recommendations over the years, this slide shows that the state has consistently pointed out that the city has no long-range master plan for water, that it needs additional usable storage, has unacceptable high unaccounted-for water, that is UFW, and has tanks that do not meet basic safety standards, etc. Here is yet another recommendation from 2008 that the city add capacity at its current plant to use the additional 10 million gallons per day water supply that is available there. Oh, one final comment at the bottom. It appears that the city has not changed out the filter media since 1985. One has to ask, is the city properly maintaining our water system? Okay, finally, let's look at the rate increase passed unanimously by the City Board on November 21st, 2017, without a vote of the people or even a public hearing. Except for the shocked lady looking at her water bill, this slide is directly from the city's website. Note that the increases will be incremental with a portion added each year for the next 4 years. Note that item 1 near the bottom allocates $2 million to replace the existing switchgear, which is not protected from the elements. Wonder why they didn't build a shed over those switches before now. This slide is also directly from the city's website. Add the $2 million from the previous slide to these items. $10.47 million for improvements to city lakes, most of which aren't being used for water supply, and their own study says poses little or no risk. Throw in $5 million for a water storage tank behind Lowe's, and then $95 million for a water intake, raw water line, treatment plant, and distribution lines, and you get $110 million to be covered by the proposed bond issue, right? Wrong. You get well over $112 million, and if you ask, you will discover that this sum does not include employees, electricity and other operating expenses, other water tanks the city says are needed, legal expenses, bond costs, etc. The real cost is likely over $130 million. Okay, if this bond won't pay for these things, how do we pay for them? This question was actually asked at a city board agenda meeting on November 14th, and the deputy city manager gave an immediate response. We'll have another rate increase. The city did not record this meeting, but we did. Okay, what is wrong with the city's current plan to take water from Lake Ouachita? Let's first look at what they propose to do, and then let's propose some potential alternatives, okay? This appears to be the present plan. A raw water intake near the spillway on Ouachita, an approximately 20-mile-long raw water pipeline to a location somewhere between Amity Road and Jack Mountain, another water storage tank, and distribution lines from south of town. Makes sense, right? No, it does not, unless you are determined to spend over $110 million unnecessarily. How about this scenario? An intake, plant, and tank all at the same location. What a concept! This first removes approximately $100 million for a 20-mile-long raw water pipeline across expensive developed land, and also eliminates the need to pay thousands of dollars every day forever for pumping water several miles, plus the benefits of centralizing all facilities. It also provides a relatively high elevation from which to distribute treated water to the true growth corridor west of town. Note the topography of the area. A superb location from which to serve the primary growth area with gravity feeds, helping the distribution system. While this method would greatly reduce the capital and future operations costs, it would still cost around $25 million. Is there a way to reduce the $25 million, you ask? Yes, there is. By simply building a raw water pipeline to the present water treatment plant, we can reduce the cost to approximately $2 million. There is no expensive right-of-way to be purchased, and gravity feed would basically eliminate pumping costs. Are there other possible ways to reduce costs? Absolutely. As stated earlier, the lowest cost answer is to simply do what the State Health Department has repeatedly urged the city to do. Increase the capacity of the current plant to 30 million gallons a day. This should take care of our water needs for 25 years, longer at the present growth rates. The city also needs to take the advice of ADH and take a harder look at reducing its unaccounted for water. Selling only half the water that is treated should be unacceptable to every citizen, and it must stop. Do you now really believe that Hot Springs and Garland County has a water crisis? Do you think that the city board and administration has demonstrated that they know how to properly plan, budget, and efficiently operate a regional water utility system with most of their customers located outside the city limits? If you don't, then get busy and help us do something about it, because if you do nothing, it will result in the city fathers continuing to spend your money like it is going out of style.